Albion Park, Brisbane, headquarters of greyhound racing in Queensland. A highly professional, strictly supervised industry where speed, fitness and breeding mark the split-second difference between winning and losing. From the Gabba to the Creek.
I'm Michael Byrne, President of the Brisbane Greyhound Racing Club. The year 2002 celebrated 30 years of night greyhound racing in Queensland. Greyhound racing is both a sport and an industry. People can earn a lot of money in greyhound racing, but it also remains a family pursuit. In 2002, Albion Park by itself paid out $3 million in prize money. That's an income for people who breed, rear and train greyhounds. It's an industry with a proud history and tradition. This is the story of our club.
For a brief period of time in the 1920s, it appeared that the sport would really boom in Brisbane. A mechanical lure had been invented, and it was known as the tin hare, and a group of ambitious businessmen decided that they would attempt to run the night racing under gaslights at the Gabba. Unfortunately, there was one thing lacking, and that was there were no bookmakers and there was no legal betting allowed. So the promoters were forced to look at other avenues to attract the crowds, and one of the first things they did, they even, would you believe, had monkeys sitting on the backs of the greyhounds dressed in the jockey silks.
But with no bookies, night dogs were doomed. By the end of 1928, only one greyhound remained at the Gabba, in a grave near some fig trees where his owner had been given permission to bury him. It took more than 4 decades before a visionary Brisbane Lord Mayor took up where the dogs had left off, at the Brisbane Cricket Ground.
In the early 1970s, late 60s, the Brisbane Cricket Ground was a derelict sports ground, and no other way to describe it. The circumstances there were such that it was very, very difficult to have any amenities considered even reasonable. And I made big efforts to get the government to do something about it. I got Gordon Chalk interested in it. He came, had a look at the place, recognised how dreadful it was, and said yes, he'd like to do something about it. However, he thought that it would be desirable to at the same time deal with another problem, and that was the need for a proper greyhound racing club and headquarters and a track somewhere in the city. And I believe at that time he was considering a number of venues, and it was quite obvious that if you could use the Gabba, you had a wonderful start. And he asked me if I could do anything about it, and I said, well, it's going to be a hard sell for the cricket people, but if we can design it in such a way that it's not going to adversely affect cricket, and as a result we get a great development of the Gabba, well, I'm sure everybody will go along with it.
Clem asked me if I'd assist him in setting up a club that would then tender for the first licence to conduct night greyhound racing in Queensland. My first impression was that he knew even less about greyhound racing than I did, and that I think I suggested to him that he'd go home and have a cold shower and he'd feel better next day. But fortunately he persisted.
So I designed a track which provided 2 straights, somewhat different from anywhere else, but anyway they were there. And the treasurer then, the deputy premier as he was, said, that's great, I think we can manage it. And he went against quite a number of influential areas to go along with the Gabba.
It involved a new greyhound racing control board. There was also, if it was at the Gabba, it would be part of a total redevelopment of the Gabba complex. It needed, among other things, a fairly high-profile committee. In the tender for the licence, we had 2 other competitors. One from Lang Park and one from Albion Park. The board liked our proposal, but they also liked very much the fact that Clem was behind it, and they knew that if they gave him the challenge of setting it up, that they could then go away and look to doing something else, because they knew that Clem would come up with the goods.
Due to the enormous success of night harness racing at Albion Park, the Queensland government finally agreed to licence night greyhound racing, once again at the Brisbane Cricket Ground. But unlike the 1928 experiment, on-course bookmakers and a growing off-course TAB would be available. In 1971, the home of Test cricket in Queensland began its transformation into Australia's greyhound racing showcase. The Gabba Greyhound Racing Club was formed with Clem Jones as chairman.
Greyhound racing can take a great deal of credit for the fact that the development of the Gabba, which was critical at that stage for cricket and for the Gabba and for Queensland, went ahead mainly because of the success of greyhound racing.
We were ready for our first trial night, and we had 6,500 people there. It was absolutely amazing, and we felt very confident that we were going to be successful in Brisbane. On that night, they were so crowded that I was actually forced to get in behind a bar and helping out the barman there, and all of a sudden there seemed to be an almighty surge to the bar, and I happened to overhear a couple of patrons saying it was a pity that the lure broke down. Well, I was out of the bar like a shot, and it ended up that the mechanism that drove the lure, it had been interfered with, and we alleged that there was some sabotage involved.
But a full program with 8 dogs in a race and a big noisy crowd, now that was going to be the ultimate test.
There was 11,500 people there, and we were overwhelmed. The Clem Jones grandstand was packed, the 400-seat restaurant was booked out, the childcare centre, which we ran as a full-time centre, was looking after 100 children that night. There were 44 bookmakers, and there were nearly 50 tote windows, and they were flat out coping with the business. It was an unprecedented success.
The opening race was something when people who had never witnessed a greyhound race and never put their money on a greyhound were at the Gabba, and they had their bet. I think they first 558 metre race jumped out, and the people actually cheered when they jumped out of the boxes. They went past the post and the people were just mesmerised. They didn't know what was happening.
The actual cable that carries the lure around the track, it actually started to fray after about the 3rd race or the 4th race. But fortunately enough, John Hicks had covered all bases and made sure that we had somebody to replace to make sure everything was okay, and replace any damage. So this, Bob Emmett was the gentleman in question. He was able to repair it during the night. But the most nerve-wracking part about it was the fact that he kept waving to me to slow the lure down, make it go slower, which, as you can understand, is virtually impossible when you've got 8 dogs charging along behind you.
But the big stars of the night were the greyhounds. For many thousands of Queenslanders, it was the first time they'd seen greyhounds in action. It was a spectacular debut for the 65 km/h races, and a spectacular Gabba debut for trainer John Reimer.
Opening night was something special for everybody in greyhound racing. I won 2 races with Time and Tide, Nojinsky, and I run second, got beaten in the nose with Gady Dream. It was a big occasion for everybody.
It looked like things couldn't get any better for greyhound racing. But 6 months later, they did, in the shape of a white and brindle dog named Top Simbi. On October the 26th, 1972, Top Simbi launched himself from box 7 in a maiden race to begin one of the shortest but greatest careers in the sport.
Top Simbi, 16 to 10.
I first come to get Top Simbi through a conversation in the Gresham Hotel with a friend of mine, Bill Bryston. And he just said, "You know a bit about dogs." He said, "Go and get one." So I said, I haven't got the money to do that. I said, so he said, "Send away," and I got some cards and picked out Blacktop. Then I went to the cross with the Irish bred dog. So that's how I come to get him, and brought him home as a little pup. He was only 3 months old. And I had to send him away to get broken in, but he was such a sook and he fretted, and I had to come and get him from the place. So I brought him home and put him in the house. He wouldn't go out of the house, so I built a little box down the backyard, and the 2 kids, Kim and Neil, used to put him in the box, and away he'd fly. Then he'd go over fences and jump everywhere and play hide-and-go-seek with them all. Then I took him down to Launton. Then after he'd seen the boxes, I just stood him there, and he looked at the boxes and watched the dogs go around and the lure. and he got a bit excited. Then I took him down again, and he was an out-and-out noise chaser. Then I decided, I said, well, I've got to put you in the box and try you. And the first time in the box, he just flew out. And I said to Bill Bryce, and I said, you better come and see this dog. I said, he's not a bad dog. And he bolted in. Then I think he won, I took him to the Gabba then, and he won maiden, I think, by 18 or 21 lengths. The crowd at the Gabba always appreciated the dog very much, and every time I started him, there was an extra 1,000 people went through the gate, and the crowd was so pleased with him, and I think he was such a lair, he expected it. When he got up on his stand, he expected, and he turned round to the crowd. And we had his house name was Nicky, and I remember, I think it was Mick Cox, said, how are you doing, Nick? And he looked up.
Yeah, 1972 was a great year, and I think fitting end to the year was the night of the triple dead heat at the Gabba Greyhound Racing Club, and it was a great race. I mean, it was a wide open betting race. So Mulloway was one of the fancied candidates. Used to be a middle of the track runner, and people thought it could win, and coming for home he did look as if he was going to win, and then all of a sudden Dino's Chance loomed up, and Black Caro charged down the outside. It was very close. I thought, oh, dead heat, Black Caro Sir Mulloway. How it turned out, it was a triple dead heat, and I think that is still history in Queensland greyhound racing.
Normally I can pick a winner at the Gabba. I was pretty well perfection there at picking a winner because I was directly over the winning post. But in the case that night of the triple dead heat, when the dogs approached the winning post, it was just an uncanny effect, because looking down at them you just could not separate them, and I couldn't in my judgment.
If 1972 was a vintage year, then the 1970s proved to be a vintage decade for greyhound racing.
In 1973 and 1974, Top Simbi won 20 races from 24 race starts, picking up Greyhound of the Year awards in 1973 and 1974, and broke or equalled the 558 metre track record on 4 occasions. It was almost 4.5 years later that the Peter Rayner owned and trained Iron Hawk smashed Top Simbi's 558 metre record, recording 32.39 seconds. In 1975, Cooperoo Flyer became Queensland's first greyhound to win a national sprint championship, doing so at Wentworth Park in Sydney. In 1977, the club also had the honour of conducting the first national sprint championship in Brisbane, and that year the Victorian greyhound Beau Etzel was successful. By the end of the decade, almost $1 million was being wagered on greyhound racing on Thursday night.
All the optimism of owners, trainers and the club had been justified. But there was a cloud on the horizon.
Thursday night shopping was introduced into Brisbane in December 1978 and had an immediate effect on our attendances. Of course, in later years, stronger competition came from pub tabs, poker machines and casinos. We had to meet new challenges with top promotions and top dogs. The promotions were celebrity hurdle races, lifesavers nights, whippet races, Afghan races. We introduced numerous local and overseas celebrities and sporting stars.
The greyhounds and their trainers also rose to the new challenge. During 1978-79, every track record at the Gabba was either broken or equalled. The greyhound industry entered the 1980s as a growing sport. Many of the top champions were eagerly sought for breeding purposes by interstate owners and trainers. New training facilities were also emerging.
I enjoyed going to the Gabba just for spectacle, and we used to talk about getting involved in greyhound racing, and we had a property over at Deception Bay just after I left school. And Dad and myself and George, we decided we'd build a trial track for a business, not with the intentions of training dogs, but just as a business type of thing, and it just developed from there. About 18 years ago it was, we moved to the place we're in now here at Ormo, and it wasn't until we got there that we really took it on full time.
I went from Mitchelton out to Ferny Grove, had acreage, put on my own straight track out there and galloping paddocks, and won a few races out there with what we're doing there, and then my brother-in-law said one day, he said, there's a property up at Dobra Way that's for sale at the right price. Are you interested? And it was about 96 acres. And I said, how much? And he said, X amount of dollars. And I said, well, I'll go halves with you, which we did, and we've been up here since 1980.
The investments in training facilities and greyhounds made by trainers like John Reimer and Tony Zammit were starting to pay dividends.
I think the first race I won was with a dog called Trev's Tramp, which was owned by Graham Wigan. He won, I think it was about $500 in those days for a 5th grade win there. Now Albion Park's paying about $2,600 prize money, so the rewards are still there for prize money, and also a host of feature races throughout the year.
Competition for the prestigious Greyhound of the Year and Owner or Trainer of the Year awards at the Gabba was fierce. But the quality of breeding and training and better prize money weren't the only things that had changed in the 70s and 80s.
It's undoubtedly true that we owed a great deal to the contribution of Bill Britton, the chief steward at that time, because an important factor of setting up a new facility like that was security and credibility, and because, as I mentioned earlier, one of the perceptions, rightly or wrongly, and I don't comment on that, but there was a perception that the standard of greyhound and the profile of greyhound racing needed to be improved. And if that's true, then there couldn't have been a better person chosen to be chief steward, in my opinion, than Bill Britton.
Greyhound racing in Queensland is supervised by the GRA, which of course is the Greyhound Racing Authority, and the Greyhound Racing Authority is responsible for the administration of greyhound racing in the state. The stewards who are employed by the GRA are responsible for the race day activities that take place and the subsequent investigations or inquiries that might take place after a race meeting is conducted. Of course, when the greyhounds are identified and then they start their racing career, they're issued with a set of papers that identify each and every greyhound that races, and those papers must be produced at kennelling time when the greyhounds are then identified and of course weighed to partake in their racing engagement at any particular meeting. Queensland leads the way in the drug testing policy in Australian racing, and we do more swabs per head of greyhounds in the state of Queensland than they do in any other state in Australia.
The improved image of the sport and the nature of the greyhound itself brought about other benefits to the industry.
The sport has always had a major family appeal. Husbands, wives, sons, daughters, grandparents all play a role in greyhound racing. There's also no gender bias. Both men and women have been extremely successful as trainers and owners.
Women have always had equality in greyhound racing, as in owners, trainers, breeders, club members, and some have even served on club committees. To the best of my knowledge, the Gabba Greyhound Racing Club was the first racing club in Australia to introduce child minding facilities for the patrons and the licensees. I have many fond memories of the Gabba, but now we are racing at Albion Park, and the fond memories are there of Moreton Bay Star, who raced successfully for the Moreton Bay Retirement Village and brought them lots of pleasure. And in the later years, I had Silver Pageant, who was a Group 1 winner and a finalist of the Greyhound of the Year. But the best of all was Dancing Gamble, who raced at the Gabba and brought a lot of emotion and pleasure to the greyhound racing fraternity.
Dancing Gamble refuses to surrender. He's kicked a length and a half clear. He's got the record.
Under the presidency of people like highly respected politician Jack Houston and greyhound racing veteran Jim Neary, the club set more records and achieved more milestones in the 1980s. Meanwhile, the growing influence of TAB betting diverted many punters from racetracks. Attendances dropped off at all forms of racing. But by this time, Queensland had established a world-rated greyhound racing industry, and the results at the Gabba kept proving it.
The biggest thrill of my life was in greyhound racing was the night Madonna Lee won the National Sprint Championship in 1982. It was a very big thrill. Winning the National was a prize for us of some 24,000.
Madonna Lee in front, and Madonna Lee's too strong.
A week after Madonna Lee's history-making win for Queensland, And 2 weeks after supervising the installation of a new lighting system, the Gabba's first manager retired from his post. John Hicks had played a key role in placing greyhound racing on the world map.
I had spent 11 demanding but nevertheless exciting years in greyhound racing, from August 1971 until the time that McDonnell won the National Sprint Championship in front of a home crowd. It couldn't have been a more fitting time to step down.
A few months before John Hicks left, another personality, the voice of greyhound racing, the man who sometimes rashly claimed that his German Shepherd could beat this or that greyhound, hung up his binoculars and switched off the microphone.
Well, I did have a German Shepherd actually, and whilst I had the German Shepherd, I used to throw it into McCall's, and it used to go down sometimes it'd go down after the last, and bloke was waiting there one night and he sort of took to me and said, "Hey, listen, I'll give you German Shepherd." He said, "Oh, mine will beat the German Shepherd." Well, I didn't challenge him because mine was, she had a little bit overweight and she was a great dog, but I did have a German Shepherd, and it was just something I threw in.
But it wasn't the end of greyhound racing for Mick Cox. In 1986, he returned to the Gabba as manager, replacing John Hicks' successor, Ken Norquay. Mick liked running the show as much as he liked calling it.
It was great years, and Bob Lambert took over from me, and Bob was probably one of the best understudies you could have had. He was a very loyal employee, and he turned out to be a good manager as well.
In the mid-70s, I obtained a position as a steward with the Greyhound Racing Control Board of the day, and I held that position for about 6 years and officiated most Thursday nights at the Gabba, which was quite enjoyable. And in the early 80s, I took on a position with the Gabba Greyhound Racing Club under John Hicks as racing secretary, and I continued in that position under Ken Norquay and then Mick Cox. And then when Mick left in the early 90s, I took over as general manager and had about 10 years in that position as well.
Greyhound owners and trainers were racing for ever-increasing prize money, and this was strongly influenced by the introduction of Sky Channel in the late 1980s.
Prize money initially at the Gabba and now at Albion Park has been a big incentive to get the good dogs and people to the track, and interest off course as well. In the first 10 years at the Gabba, prize money was a bit over $5 million. By the second 10 years, that had more than doubled to $11.5 million, and the last 10 years, including 9 years at Albion Park, prize money is over $25 million.
In 1987, Pretty Fearless became Australia's greatest stakes winner with $101,000 prize money.
Look at this for a great win. Pretty Fearless wins the Coca-Cola.
Back in 1987, I had the best dog I've ever had. His name was Pretty Fearless. He came to our farm when we needed a good dog. My wife was working. We were getting short of money. We had a mortgage on our property. Suddenly, Pretty Fearless wins the Coca-Cola Cup. It was a dream come true.
Hopeful Doll was another Queensland-owned greyhound to set new standards for the sport.
Hopeful Doll is streaking away. Hopeful Doll brilliantly from Lord.
Hopeful Doll was a wonderful thrill for Ham and I. She broke the 558 metre track record in August 1986. Following year, she came out and broke the 704. And she was instrumental in us continuing to win the Owners' Premiership. We won from 1979 to 1987, thanks to some very good trainers that we had, including Mike O'Byrne, and the kindness that his wife Jeanette showed to our dogs.
By 1992, the success of the Gabba had led to new night racing venues being established throughout Queensland. The industry had never been in better shape. And then in the same year, a new challenge arose. The state government decided to redevelop the Brisbane cricket ground.
Part of the plan was to find a new home for AFL in Brisbane. The Brisbane Bears, soon to become the Brisbane Lions, were playing at Carrara and needed somewhere else to go. But there was a snag at the Gabba. The oval was too small with the greyhound track. It needed to be redeveloped. There needed to be new facilities for both the cricket and the AFL. Unfortunately, the greyhound track had to go. The club had 20 years to run on its lease at that time, and we could have dug our toes in. But the government offered a new track at Albion Park with new facilities. The committee took a mature decision, took everyone's interest into account, the government, AFL, cricket, and decided that we would move to Albion Park, and in the end got a great deal for the greyhound racing industry.
On February 4, 1993, the last meeting conducted by the Gabba Greyhound Racing Club was held at the Brisbane Cricket Ground. Now, once again, all the attention was on a new and very different track for greyhound racing.
When we decided to move from the Gabba, which was the grass track, we decided at Albion Park we would have a sand track, mainly because we were going to race twice a week and the maintenance wouldn't be nowhere near the cost of preparing the track for racing. The track itself is a conventional track with 2 bends and 2 straights, the straights being approximately 85 metres long. And with the cambers that we've put on the track, it gives every dog a chance of going round the bend at the speed that they are entitled to go round without interference, and therefore I think it is a very safe track for the dogs to race on.
Albion Park is probably one of the safest tracks in Australia because of that banking on the corners, and this minimises interference, and a lot of the injuries that we see in greyhounds comes through interference on the turns, and in particular the first turn. There are studies that have been done to show that the highest percentage of injuries occur on that first turn. So if you can create a track that allows greyhounds to get around the first bend safely, then you're going to minimise injuries, and also you're going to provide a better quality of racing as there's less interference.
One of the identities who made the transition from the Gabba to the new Albion Park track was leading greyhound race caller Paul Dolan.
Certainly the history of Albion Park as a racing venue is most interesting. They had gallops here up until 1981. Harness racing was combined with the gallops from 68 to 81. They closed the gallops track down, put the big harness track down in 83, and then greyhounds came here in 93. So I think it's had a transition from originally a gallops track and then a gallops and harness track, and now it's widely known, widely regarded as a greyhound and harness racing complex. Well, if the Gabba was remembered as the track for Top Simbi, I think it would be fair to say Flying Amy was equally as famous here at Albion Park. They were 2 different dogs, and it's certainly unfair to say one was better than the other. They were different types of dogs. Top Simbi won up to 732 metres when Bert Kennedy took him to Sydney. Flying Amy was an out-and-out sprinting sensation.
Flying Amy in front, toss the teddy, can't catch the flying machine out in front. Flying Amy gives a devastating display.
Flying Amy was a freak of a time. She broke the 30-second barrier at Albion Park 10 times and also won 2 Greyhound of the Years, won $355,000 in prize money, and made 2 owners very, very happy in Phyllis Tedford and Mavis Ball. Also brought a lot of joy and pride to myself. And she still holds the Albion Park track record at 29.73.
I'll tell you what, we should have Tina Turner or Jimmy Barnes here because this is simply the best. Home goes Flying Amy, wins by 6.
Flying Amy was by far the best greyhound to grace Albion Park, but when she retired the story didn't end there. Her son, by the name of Just the Best, went on to win a number of races at Albion Park, and in a short career he broke the 30 seconds barrier on 3 occasions, and he has then gone on to be a great success at stud.
Nujaloo for Reg Crawford, we'd have to name him an iron dog. He went on and won 32 races here at Albion Park, and Winged Runner, the more recent champion I suppose, Lionel Ledley and the boys called her the people's greyhound, and she was, because she was so consistent. You could rely on Winged Runner to always deliver 101%.
Greyhound racing in Queensland has faced great challenges in the 1990s and into the new millennium. There's been a massive increase in competition from all forms of entertainment. Off-course gambling is easy to access, it's comfortable, and it's at the tip of your fingers. And there's been another factor. Off the track, away from the action.
The club committee deserve a lot of credit for the success of the industry. There's also, of course, the Greyhound Racing Authority, their stewards, and the Queensland Racing Department who've contributed to the sport. It's for that reason, the input of all those people, that we've had stability over 30 years. It's why the sport's been able to grow despite difficult times. In the final analysis, it's the breeders, owners and trainers and their dogs that have made Queensland greyhound racing what it is today. They've built an industry on top of a family hobby. This is their success story.
30 years on, hairdriver Jack McDonald remains at the controls. For him and those owners, trainers and greyhounds over the years, it all comes down to race night.